CEO and co-founder. It is Friday. Hurricane Lee is not going to hit Rhode Island head on. We're lucky to get a little bit. But where the big storm is down at the University of Virginia with Jennifer Lawless. She's the chair of the political science department, and there is a big storm brewing on just about everything in American politics right now. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, happy to join you.
Okay, let's go to my favorite subject, your least favorite subject, Hunter Biden. He was indicted yesterday by special prosecutor, not on one, not on two, but on three charges. Your thoughts on the indictment?
Well, so the indictment had to do with the possession of a gun charge while being treated, for addiction issues.
No, it was not. It was indicted on three gun charges.
But this is right. He was indicted on three gun charges. The indictment had nothing to do with the tax evasion and other issues that had been part of this broader plea deal that was rendered unacceptable a couple of weeks ago. Legally, I'm not an expert on this. Politically, I think it's actually excellent news for the Biden administration and Biden's election team, because what this does is pop a hole in the balloon of this argument that there's this two-tiered system of justice, because Biden's own Justice Department is now moving forward charging the president's son. Now, whether people are going to still continue to say that this is an apples to oranges comparison and that Donald Trump was, indicted on charges that did not merit an indictment and Hunter Biden is indicted on charges that do, it does make it more difficult to say that Democrats and Republicans are held to two totally different standards and that the Bidens and the Trumps are held to two totally different standards.
Now, I don't want to bring up the previous episodes in which you have appeared on GoLocal Live, which we always appreciate you to do. I don't want to pull a Tim Russert and go to the previous film. But moving forward, will you and some of your compatriots who receive direct messaging from the White House on a regular basis be starting a free Hunter movement? Will that be the next effort to sort of exonerate him from these federal gun charges?
Look, I think that it's probably the case that if Hunter Biden's last name was not Biden, the plea deal would have gone through and these charges would not have come out a couple of days ago. That said, given what we know about people's skepticism regarding the fairness of the American judiciary, given what people think about, especially on the Republican side of the aisle, about different standards being set for Democrats and Republicans when charges like this are handed down, I actually do not think that this is a case where Democrats should be rallying behind Hunter Biden and doing everything they can to try and get this indictment thrown out. He's guilty. He did this. He shouldn't have, and he has to. I think he has to pay the price, and I think it will ultimately help people think about the American judiciary as a little bit more fair. Now, whether we should have gotten to this point in the first place, and whether it's unfortunate that one person is going to have to take one for the team on this, is a totally different question. But I'm certainly not going to be part of the free Hunter movement.
Yeah, and I'm not sure the world's been unfair to Hunter Biden. I don't think he would have had the contracts and made the millions of dollars in consulting fees if his name hadn't been Biden. So I think in the global
maybe,
sense
but there is a distinction. But I think there is a distinction between using your name and using your connections to advance your own, economic interests, et cetera, and then the judicial system deciding on what the appropriate punishment is going to be based on somebody's last name. So they're two totally different things.
Listen, the Department of Justice, which Joe Biden has repeatedly said he is not, he is hands off, the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. If he's hands off, he's hands off. They came to the conclusion, a special prosecutor did, that he violated 3 federal crimes.
Right. Okay. No, and I think that it makes it very difficult for Republicans and Biden opponents to say that Biden is meddling with the Justice Department or that he's asking for special treatment for his son. And that's a clear juxtaposition that Democrats can make with the way that Trump tried to use the Justice Department and also tried to inoculate his own family members from any kind of penalty.
Let me go to my inner John McLaughlin and say, this is good news for Joe Biden. Next, Morton Kondracki. Let's jump over to the age issue, which is really becoming a very significant problem for Joe Biden. It is sort of the talk of the town. There are real questions now going around Democratic circles. Joe Scarborough's on the record saying every single Democrat he has spoken to thinks that Joe Biden is too old to run for re-election. I will say, from my impression of watching press conferences, he seems to have aged a significant amount in a relatively short period of time. It is becoming a major, major distraction to this campaign. And with Americans not giving him credit for his legislative accomplishments or the positive aspects of the economy, is this really growing into a major, major issue for the Biden administration?
No, it's an excellent talking point for people that don't want to see Biden get reelected. But I would say a few things. The first is all of these people that say they wish Biden was not running for reelection, or that they wish he were younger, or that they wish they had a nominee who was, full of new ideas and was a fresh face, are also 100% on board with reelecting Joe Biden. So there's a difference between actual opportunities and candidates in front of you, and if the world was an oyster, who you would choose. So that's the first point I would make. The second is Donald Trump is 3 years younger and a lot less articulate, a lot less able to pass any sort of real legislation, and a lot less able to make a case to the American people about why he should be elected president. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, Joe Biden's 80 and Donald Trump's only 77. 77 is not a spring chicken. And it's difficult to argue, if anybody has seen Donald Trump speak in the last 6 months, that he is able to do any better a job than Joe Biden. The final thing I would say is this should not obviously be a race to the bottom to see who's the least incompetent. But if you watch Joe Biden's speech on, Democratic backsliding and democracy the other day, he's aged because every president ages in office. If you look at Barack Obama during his first and third year, if you look at Bill Clinton, if you look at George W. Bush, in all of these cases, we've seen a substantial progression because the job is so harrowing. The difference in those cases were that those guys started in their 40s. So I don't think that's surprising, but I don't think there's anything to suggest that he's not up to the job, that he's not healthy, and that he's not able to serve another term.
Yeah, Barack Obama started and he looked 40 when he was elected. 8 years later, he looked 50. Okay?
Right.
Joe Biden started at 80. He now looks 110.
We can agree to disagree on that.
Age is becoming a dominant issue in Congress. Obviously, Dianne Feinstein, Mitch McConnell's recent problems, health-related, and even Mitt Romney, in stepping down, raised his own age as an issue and said, we're too old as a legislative body. These candidates for president are too old. He said that both Trump, obviously, and Biden should not be running for re-election. Are we now hitting a point in which this is a real significant issue and voters should be thinking about it?
I think there's a lot of variation, and the examples of Dianne Feinstein and more recently Mitch McConnell certainly speak to the idea that the older you get, the more likely it is that it becomes difficult for you to carry out the responsibilities of that job. And the minute it's clear that you are not acting as a representative of your constituency and you're not able to function in Congress the way that you used to, if you're not going to step down, then yes, I think it's up to the voters to hold you accountable. That said, there's a lot of variation. And for some people, 78 is the new 40. Nancy Pelosi announced that she's seeking re-election. She's in her 80s. She'll be in her 80s. Nobody would argue that she doesn't still have what it takes, to represent San Francisco for another 2 years. There are many members of the House and senators who are in their 70s who are doing the job just as well as they did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So, I think there's a lot of variation here, and just how when you go to the grocery store, sometimes you see somebody and you think they're 90 and they're actually, 75, and sometimes you see somebody who's 75 and you think that they're 40. It depends, and it depends on how the person is performing. So I'm against any kind of blanket, like you've reached this age, you're no longer able to work here. But I do think it's certainly fair game for voters to assess and to consider when thinking about, for whom they want to cast a ballot in the next election.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has announced that the House will move forward with an investigation towards an impeachment of President Biden. Your thoughts?
It's completely ridiculous, but you know what? Let him do whatever he wants. I've gotten to the point where I really believe that the Republican Party is in such disarray, in the House of Representatives in particular. We've reached a point now where Kevin McCarthy can't just promise the Matt Gaetzes and the Bob Hoods of the world that he's going to do something. They're actually requiring that he behave in a particular way, and we're beginning to see the kinds of promises that he made to get elected Speaker. If he moves forward, he's basically guaranteeing the Democrats a majority in 2024, because there are not enough people who can vote against this impeachment inquiry and get reelected in purple districts for McCarthy. So he's putting his own members between a rock and a hard place. He's placating a minority of his own conference because his own power was more important to him. And he's airing the party's dirty laundry quite publicly, which voters really don't like to see. So, you know what? Bring it on.
Let's jump over to, we haven't talked in a week and a half, Gabe Amo's win in the 1st Congressional District primary. Voter turnout was slightly better than anticipated. It was about 44,000. I think people thought 40,000 or less. Aaron Ruggenberg looked like he was going to win it until Don Carlson got knocked out. And I think there's a conventional wisdom that many of Don Carlson's votes, who is sort of a middle of the road candidate, but highly competent and highly experienced, may have gone over to Gabe Amo to give him the victory. What's your thoughts on this race?
I mean, I think it was really a feel-good win. As I was watching the votes come in that night, I was just sort of like, this is amazing. There were a diverse array of candidates. They represented, the diversity that is now Rhode Island. And I think it's terrific that for the first time, Rhode Island's going to be sending a non-white member to Congress. I also think that this speaks to the importance of just a handful of votes in a race. We talked about TV, we talked about various scandals among the candidates, and I think all of the stars sort of aligned, where Imo had a very good ground game. Apparently, he had a good campaign. He was pretty much below the radar, under the radar screen right until the end, and he had other candidates succumb to scandal and negative coverage, and he was able to eke it out. And I think it was a nice election night story. The other thing that I would note is, Ruggenberg lost, obviously, but the big loser was Sabina Matos. And, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, 3 months ago, even a month ago, if I thought there was any chance that she was not going to be the next member of Congress, I would have said no. In the weeks leading up to the election, it looked increasingly likely that she'd be defeated. But, how poorly she fared was really striking.
Yeah, I mean, also for you, a woman who ran for Congress, hoping to be the first Democrat member of the congressional delegation, is there also sort of a little bittersweetness that once again, another male won? Gabe Amo obviously being the first minority is likely to beat the Republican by all measures. Is this have a little bittersweetness to the outcome of this primary?
I mean, baby steps, right? Like, this is something. Maybe the Democrats will send a woman to Washington one day. We'll see. But it's hard not to be excited.
Hey, listen, we're early in the century. They've still got more than 70 years to turn this thing around.
It's true. It's only been 30 since anybody did it, or more actually now. 32 years since anyone was in Washington who was a woman.
Yeah, that's right. Your take on the next couple of weeks? We've got a gazillion Trump trials in different iterations. We've got this House impeachment that I don't think is going to get a tremendous amount of attention because there's been no ability by the Republicans to articulate even why they're moving forward on this. You do have Hunter Biden that's likely to potentially go to trial before the election. We've just got a tremendous number of moving domestic political muck all going on at the same time. Your thoughts on what the next couple of weeks are going to look like?
So 2 things. I think the first, the looming government shutdown is really important. It looks like we're headed for a shutdown. And it looks like that shutdown could actually last a while, given the congressional schedule and the likelihood of Democrats and Republicans striking a compromise. It's hard to see how the Republicans aren't ultimately blamed for it. They generally have been in the past. and that's not necessarily a position that Kevin McCarthy wants to be in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the new COVID vaccines came out, and we're already seeing Ron DeSantis setting himself apart from Republicans by issuing a statement, holding a press conference, and saying that he and the Florida Surgeon General are recommending that anybody under the age of 65 not get the vaccine because it's not effective and it's not safe. And so that, I think, is going to be a big argument that's pushed forward over the course of the next few weeks, certainly at the next Republican debate, where DeSantis is trying to carve out a place for himself among conspiracy theorists, among people who are very leery about the federal government and the FDA playing any role in public health, and bashing Trump for actually spearheading the vaccine when he was still president. So it'll be fascinating to watch that. And I hope that Floridians and people across the rest of the country obviously disregard DeSantis' message and get the shot.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis has had amazing opportunity to be a front runner in this campaign, potentially toppling Trump by focusing on how well he managed the economy over the past few years. And listen, the numbers speak for themselves. He's got lots to crow about. Instead, he turned towards fighting with Disney and school books and curriculums in colleges and schools. And since he has started that narrative, he has gone from almost 30% in the Republican primary vote, down to about 15 or 14%. It's not a winning schedule, and
it's not, and now he's putting lives at stake too.
Yeah, just amazing. As always, thank you so much for joining us. For everybody else, stay tuned. It does look like the hurricane is going to miss us, heading off, traveling more to the east, and maybe clipping a little bit of Cape Cod and portions of Maine, but Rhode Island looks to be maybe some rain and maybe some wind, but none of the force or size that this storm looked like it could be at the beginning of the week. Also, stay tuned for updates from GoLocal throughout the weekend. We'll have a ton more and following up on a number of major stories. Everybody stay safe, stay dry, and enjoy this great weekend. Thanks, everybody.